My name is Father Jim Keenan. I'm the director of the Jesuit Institute, and I'm happy to welcome Pierre de Charentonnet. Pierre and I were talking about the events of the past few days from Paris, and then he handed me a 2-page, 10-point list of his observations, and I said, I think you should share these. So Pierre de Charentonnet is the Gasson Professor here at Boston College this year. The Gasson Professor is an appointment that the university has created about 40 years ago. Bill Neenan was the first person brought in with it. But we've been recruiting Jesuits from around the world who are well known to be on our faculty for a year, and Pierre has joined us this year. In 1980, he did his doctorate in political science in Paris. Later, in 1991 to 1997, he was the president of Saint-Tropez. He's probably best known for his being the chief editor of the monthly Études in Paris, which is the most read monthly in France. He was the editor from 2004 to 2012 of Études. After that, he was a visiting professor at the Ateneo de Manila in the Philippines. And presently, besides being the Gasson Chair, he's a member of the Faculty of Writers at Civiltà Cattolica in Rome. He has 9 books to his credit and a lot of opinions. So the way we will proceed is he will speak for about 20 minutes and share his points, but he's more interested in your questions. So then I'll moderate the questions as you pose them and he answers them. And we'll go until, say, 5:30, 5:45, according to how sustained you are. He's sustained, so yeah.
Thank you, Jim, for this introduction and for this opportunity to try to reflect on these terrible things of Paris attacks. I think there has been many days of emotion, and we can understand that, and some days of prayer, but after that we have to reflect and try to think, because this is the only way that we can maybe sometime prevent these events from starting again, and trying to also, in the time of election, to avoid this type of incredible reactions which are totally irrational and dangerous, because people are going to vote, and if anybody uses the emotion of a population in this type of time, it's a real problem. So I think it's important to reflect and to try to understand what was going on and what we can do. Is there any solution to these factors, to this event? And that's certainly a big issue that we have to face. Paris was at the top of the list of terrorist attack by ISIS. The reason is that Paris and France has attacked Syria with fighter bombers, but also that France is the only country which is trying to stop ISIS groups or equivalent groups in Africa, like in Nigeria, Mali, and other places. So it has been under the target of ISIS for some time. An attack in Toulouse, the south of France, had been avoided some days before this attack in Paris, and the day before, on Thursday, the Prime Minister said that France was under threat of a terrorist attack. So they all knew something could happen, and this happened. So this attack is very different from the attack that we had in January, so that's 2 in 1 year. Very different from the attack in Charlie Hebdo in January, because at that time, the 2 terrorists had a very precise target, which is the journalists of Charlie Hebdo. While here it's a sort of attack on anonymous target, on anybody. It could have been anybody, and with the purpose to make the greatest damage possible. In that sense, it's new in Europe. And the reaction also has been very different. The reaction to the attack on Charlie Hebdo was 2 or 3 days later, a huge demonstration of 1 or 2 million people in Paris with 40 heads of states or government who came there to say that the freedom of speech should be protected, even if we don't like Charlie Hebdo. This has to be protected. Here, the reaction was totally different. The next day, Saturday, all the streets were empty. The theaters were empty. Notre Dame and nobody. The Eiffel Tower was closed. So there was a sort of feeling of emptiness, suddenly mourning for all those people lost, but also for fear and for uncertainty for the future. People didn't know what to do with that, and they were asked to stay home. So let's go back to the fact. 8 different attackers in 3 groups, among them 5 French citizens, so they are not foreigners, 5 French citizens and some others from Belgium. 3 men wanted to get into the stadium in the north of France, the north of Paris, but this stadium is very well guarded, so they could not get in, and they stayed outside and they exploded themselves outside. Another group of 3 entered in the concert hall, the Bataclan, which is a very big concert hall with around 1,000 people. And they started to fire, and finally also to explode themselves with their belt. And a third group of 2 fired on various sidewalks cafes. One of them is dead, and the other one is on the run, probably in the north of France or Belgium somewhere. There was probably a 4th group also, 4th group for the logistic, because we learned that they slept around Paris in the suburb just the day before, and they had reservation in a hotel in case they could stay there, or other people of the logistics system could stay there. So they rented car, they reserved rooms, so it was a whole organization which was quite important. This type of attack is new in Europe. The coordination of several groups of individuals show clearly a very high level of preparation and planning without using the normal electronic ways of communication. Otherwise, they would have done that in Paris. The police would have interfered. Most of the authors of the attacks were wearing explosive belts, which means they had accepted before, and starting there, they had already accepted to die in the operation. They acted against anonymous people and not against a specific target. So this is clearly a stepping up of terrorism in the heart of Europe, what specialists are calling now mass terrorism. So it's also a change in the strategy of ISIS. ISIS forces are in some way stopped in Syria by the multiple airstrikes of American, Russian, and French planes. The Kurds have taken back an important city, Sinjar. And we have the same scenario in Yemen or in Nigeria with Boko Haram. ISIS-affiliated groups have been stopped in different places. And since it is now stopped in some way on the battlefield, ISIS is switching to a different action, an international action of terrorism, more in the style of Al-Qaeda. So we've seen the Russian plane in Egypt, the attack of Beirut, and now Paris. So that's for them a way of demonstrating that they have still a capacity of destruction. But it's also for them a way of keeping the pressure on the West, and a way to say that they are still active, even if they have problems on the field. This is very important for the recruitment of new fighters. The number of arrivals of foreigners as new recruits for ISIS in Syria had been declining in the last month. So with this type of attack, ISIS hopes to be more present in the mind of possible radicalized jihadists. We should expect in the future more of that type of mass terrorism by suicide fighters on some big anonymous targets. For the analysis, it's very important to be clear on the idea that this is not a war with Muslims. All Muslims in Europe have denounced this type of act. There is no more in the Quran than in the Bible, which can be very violent, the Bible, than no more in the Quran than in the Bible, which can justify this kind of attack. Why would Islam attack this way and use this type of violence when it did not do that for 13 centuries? In that sense also, this is not a clash of civilizations, but it's an act of terrorism against a particular government. And the theory of clash of civilizations prevents us from understanding the reality of terrorism. And also, it leads to wrong answers like the multiplicity of Islamophobic acts against mosques and Muslims, which is happening now those days in France. And also we have to say that this is not a war. These acts are terrorist acts. It's very important to be clear on that also, because the interpretation you give will have an important impact on your strategy for the future. A war is a conflict between two identified and visible enemies. They know who they are and where they are and why they fight. You may use various means, but they all are weapons employed against specific and known targets. The armies will fight against each other until one army is completely down. You know when the war starts and when it ends. Then there are discussions on a treaty, an agreement, and so on. With terrorism, the enemy is invisible. It can strike anytime, anywhere, and there seems to be no end to that. You will not be able to destroy them until you have dried up the source of that terrorist action. The reason given for their terrorist action also is most often confused and vague, lost in a very ideological discourse. On the other side, the discourse on war implies that targeted strikes on ISIS camps will solve the problem, as if you just target ISIS camps, that will be finished. And this is misleading the people. Such airstrikes might weaken the organization, and it has weakened the organization, but it does not end terrorism. This type of discourse on war is used more for popular consumption in an electoral campaign. It does not solve the problem. New fighters will come from nowhere and strike again. So we have to look for the causes of such a phenomenon of terrorism. There are global reasons and also personal reasons in the fighters who does that, among the fighters of ISIS. On the global side, the first question arises after these attacks by ISIS. Why do we have, first of all, this ISIS group in Syria and Iraq? This involves the long story of extreme radicalism in the Muslim world that gave birth to Al-Qaeda years ago. But Al-Qaeda now is much weaker after the strike in 9/11 here in New York and Washington. But it gave birth more recently to ISIS, led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who formed the ISIS, which means Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, on April 8, 2013, so it's recent, which was transformed into a worldwide caliphate in June 29, 2014. This caliphate would apply the rule of an extreme version of Islam on its territory. And they did that in the territory they got in Syria. The strength of ISIS relies on the geographic localization of a rebellion that makes possible source of money, like illicit traffic of all kinds, even including work of art that they would steal in the region, oil, natural gas, and so on. So it's a possible source of money, but it also attracts thousands of foreigners, mainly from Europe. But the geographic localization of the conflict has also its weaknesses, since it has become an easy target for foreign aerial bombardment. In a sense, it's a transformation from terrorism to a real war with an enemy which you can identify and then you can destroy. It's a different strategy from Al-Qaeda, but with both ups and downsides. The second question is the recruitment of ISIS members. Who are the fighters of that war, if there is war, at least in Syria? Where do they come from? This is the act of some radicalized young people who have connections with ISIS in Syria. Many are from the region itself, and some are recruited in Europe, even 2 or 3 from the States. We have to keep in mind that it's relatively easy to go back and forth from the Middle East and Europe, especially through Turkey. So let's look first at those who are coming from the Arab countries. A whole set of factors are pushing young people to radicalization in that region. This region has been destabilized in the last 20 years. The war in Iraq, the dismantling of Libya, the war in Syria after the Arab Spring, the war in Yemen, which everyone forgets. So this created a huge open space for propaganda and recruitment by ISIS on the spot. Now for Europe is different. The reasons of radicalization are related to the social unrest in many suburbs of Europe, especially in France, where there is no employment for young people and where the suburbs concentrate a lot of frustrated young people. 3,000 Europeans, some say 6,000, have joined the ISIS army, among them at least 1,400 French people. Some French have returned from Syria, 300 of them. So 300 have spent some time in Syria and are now in France and are acting under ISIS influence. This frustration is augmented by an extreme political and social anger in protest against globalization, Western domination of the economy, and against Western values in general, democracy, individual freedom, and so on. So terrorism is the answer they find, because very often the political answer seems impossible for them. And the propaganda of ISIS goes through various channels in Europe. ISIS people are recruited in prison, some others by internet, some by radical preachers, and then they enter into contact with ISIS members in Syria. The recruitment is followed by a sectarian indoctrination, generally during the course of a trip to Syria, a real brainwashing up to an extreme radicalization where people are ready to die for the cause. Remember, in the recent Paris attack, they all have been wearing explosive belt for suicide, which was not the case with the attack in Charlie Hebdo. Jihadism is a very strong ideology, dangerous and powerful, with a real attraction to some elements of our societies. At some point, radicalized people are not open to debate and discussion. They are just away from any rational discourse, like if they had entered a sect with which discussion is just impossible. Those people should be confronted by the use of force. This does not mean that other attempts should not be made to reach out to ISIS members. Some programs of de-radicalization have worked in various instances. That is why it's very important to clarify the roots of the radicalization process and the reasons of this process which leads to terrorism. Thus, terrorism is a bad answer for some Europeans to serious problems they have and what they see in their lives: frustration, unemployment, outrageous inequality in the world, and so on. How do we solve those problems? This is a question for all our Western countries. They are international issues that have to be dealt with by international community. I will discuss that in a moment. But they are local issues that each government, each community has to face. What do we do with our younger generation? Is our education system adequate? Is our way of organizing the cities respectful of the diversity and the necessary communications between communities? Do our democracies give a voice to all, including people who feel marginalized because they have no job? So there is a need for an examination of how our democracy are working. At the same time, there is a need for action at the international level. We have to look ahead. The Syrian crisis represents a total failure of the international community for 4 years. This cannot go on. We need much effort in a diplomatic solution, which could lead to common military action if necessary. We have not improved the situation so far. It's essential to reach a political agreement on Syria, with or without Assad. The seeming impossibility to find agreement with Russia on any decisive action is part of the reason of this type of situation. But the question is so complicated that even with an agreement with Russia, we might not be able to bring peace to that region where terrorism is harbored. In 20 years, we have destroyed all the precarious balance of the region in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in all the Middle East, which was already a very unstable place with Israel, Palestine, Iran, and so on. The old way of governance through tribes and regional powers has been destroyed. We did not put anything credible in its place. That should make us think about diplomacy today. Some elements of conclusion before we discuss and debate. These attacks in Paris reveal once more a worldwide threat touching the West world. It has been going on for many years now, since 9/11, in Bali, in Madrid, in London, in Bombay, recently in the Sinai with the Russian plane and so on. So the Paris attack shows dramatic upgrade on this type of attack. The world will have to live for some time with terrorism, which is acting now in the heart of our countries. Military action is certainly necessary against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Everything should be done to prevent them from getting more financial resources on the ground through natural gas, oil, and so on. Meanwhile, protection at home is crucial. Europe is so far less protected than the US because of the ease of getting in and out. Anybody can come from neighboring countries without control. Free circulation is great for law-abiding people in Europe, but terrorists use that too. And the security budgets are very low compared to what's going on in the US. If you consider the US security budget of $46 billion a year, you find that all of Europe spends less than 5% of that. America is more protected because of the controls at the border and the enormous effort of intelligence. It's incredible that this type of commando of 8 people, well coordinated, armed with every heavy material, grenades and so on, had been able to act without being noticed. The absence of a European reaction is dramatic. We cannot leave the burden of decision to each country separately. But many nations of Europe refuse to accept a common policy in order to face a common crisis. A simple coordination of intelligence would avoid the blunder that was made by the French police. They stopped a car in that car was the only surviving of the author of the attack, Salah Abdeslam. And since he was not in the files of the French police, they let it go. And he went to Brussels, where there is in the Belgian police files. And there is no communication between Belgium and France on those things. At the same time, there is a refugee crisis. Some have been very quick to make the link between the two phenomena. There should be a debate on that, but it would be far too easy just to say security, security, and to refuse the refugees. We also have a duty toward this population, which is paying a very heavy price for a war they never wanted, and that the international community is not able to solve. There should be normal screening for them like everybody else, but they should not be suspected more than anybody else. Protection is essential, and an effort should be made on that in Europe, but protection alone is not sufficient to prevent young people entering this deadly circle of ISIS. That's the main point. Terrorism is created by people, not by government. They are free people, freely entering into this deadly dynamic. So one of the actions against terrorism is to prevent people from getting into that deadly circle. Changes will have to be made in the West in our own management of marginalized people and our globalized world as a whole if we want really to destroy the roots of terrorism. Thank you.
So as I said, we're interested in hearing your questions, and so please. Yes.
All right, so I was in first grade when the 9/11 happened, and I even noticed that there was a shift in our values as a country after that day. I was just wondering if you see the French people valuing security more now that this has happened.
I think they will tell the government of France and the governments of Europe that they should work a little more on security, because there's a work done on security, but not enough, clearly. The budget is not there, there are not enough people, and so on. So what I would call the hard target, like the Élysée Palace, or Notre Dame, or the Eiffel Tower, this is well guarded. But the rest, which would be the soft target, is not enough control. And probably the intelligence service through electronic is not enough either. Now, the French people are very touchy on their freedom, and too much of of control might go against their freedom. So they will, we have instances of control to prevent that. So I don't think there's a real danger of having a sort of dictatorship coming like this unnoticed, no. But there's certainly an effort to be made from Europe and from France on that topic. But the main values remain. I just want to quote, maybe some people saw that on the internet. There's a French guy who wrote to the terrorists and say, "You will not have my hate." And that was an incredible, and this all is explained. You wanted me to get furious and to go against you. You will not get my hate. That means he was touched, but he's not getting angry. And I think this, he has a lot of followers on Facebook on that sentence, and this is, I think, clearly what French people would say. There's no reason to hate, and but let's be a little more careful.
Yes.
So, as you mentioned earlier, a good portion of the terrorists were in fact citizens of France. To what extent do you think the secular nature of France is encouraging perhaps the indoctrination of these very extreme ideologies?
That's a good and difficult question.
Sorry.
No, but it's very important to discuss that. I think the main problem is not religious. The main problem is social, really social. Those people find no place in their area. They have no job, and they probably have in themselves some very strong personal religious questions. And but this also is used by some radicals, imam or others, who are just pushing them to an extreme form of Islam, which is not Islam anymore. But they would be pushed to that. But would that secular thing? There's also extreme. They also come from Great Britain, Belgium, and other countries. So I don't think this secular situation of France. Maybe there's less capacity for them to relate to some religious background, since there is not anymore a religious background. But you have churches and mosques everywhere, and they can find what they want if they really want something on the religious side. But the problem is that they are in a difficult situation, personal situation, family problem, and so on. Sometimes they have been given to a family because they could not live with their parents, and so on. So there is a social and personal and psychological situation which is very unstable for them. And at one point, someone radical is coming to them and tell them, "I have a solution for you. Please just come with me." So it's a sort of very gradual process. They will never say at the beginning of the process they would finish by killing people. But it's a very gradual process, and then they go in more and more radicalized, and then they go to Syria, and they come back, they are ready for everything. So in that sense, it's a sectarian process in their mind, which goes beyond any kind of local religious situation.
I was just wondering, do you think there is a discrimination against the Muslims, especially Arabs, in French society? And do you think that's another reason that they can't get jobs and they become depressed and have all these problems? Just wondering.
In France, it's around 5 million Muslims. Many of them, 99% of them are well integrated. Some are in politics. The Minister of Education is from Muslim culture. The Minister of Work is from Muslim culture. Many journalists are from Muslim tradition. So this is not the fact that they are Muslim, but for them, there's a sort of different elements which are piling up one over the other. So they are in the suburbs where they don't care, they have no employment. They try to get employment, but maybe the employer is looking at them saying, that's not too sure. So there is some racism or discrimination behind that. But a lot of people find the job, even if they are Muslim with a name that you clearly recognize. So it's an accumulation of different factors. And it's true that if you're a name like that, you have no job, you live in a special place near Paris where people know that there's a lot of unemployment and social movement, that people might not be tempted to hire them. So it's a cumulative process which is really negative for them. And that's one of our problems probably. They have nobody just to give them a hand. That the education process and the high schools in those cities are just bad. And no one wants to go there to be teacher. So they accumulate all the negative problems on them.
Ali?
I wonder what, in your judgment, might be some of the political ramifications of this in French politics in the coming weeks and months. Which directions do you think it might go, and what might change?
That's another delicate question. It's also very interesting. So there is already a sort of coming election process for 2017. The President of the Republic, Hollande, is very low in all the polls. He has been like this for 2 or 3 years, so it's not new. You know, the extreme right, Marine Le Pen, is in the process of, I would say, normalization. She's trying to erase all the extreme section or words that her father were using. You know, it's just between us, but his father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, when I see Donald Trump, I just look at him. But, well, that's another problem. But then, sure, the extreme right, which is trying to be normalized, will get much more vote, because they have already said, we will work for your security, be sure you will be safe at home, and so on. The thing that we hear also here. So that will certainly push the election process more to the right. Now, will Sarkozy use that? But there is a big competition for all this right conservative sector between Sarkozy and Marine Le Pen. So Sarkozy is just telling more and more on security so he can get people from Marine Le Pen. And so it's a marketplace to the one who is using the world's stronger words on security. But now President Hollande had a meeting yesterday with the whole Congress. He made several proposals on security, and then all the conservatives now are without saying, they can't say anything, because Hollande has been very strict. I mean, we have to pay for that, we will do this, we'll change the constitution, we'll have a bigger budget on security. So all the things that the right could propose, the left is going to do it. So, well, we'll see how they can go on for the several
Could you just
days.
say a word about what changing the constitution means? I mean, that phrase would be a very radical phrase.
Yeah, but you
What
change.
do they mean by that?
Yeah,
I
if
heard
you
that. Yeah.
if you change a world, just a world, you change the constitution. So the idea is to change about the state of emergency. So to change the status of the state of emergency and its consequences in the constitution. So this is just these little things, but that means it's for the media it's very impressive, and it has a sort of shock upon the public opinion. We will change the constitution, even if we change half a small phrase. But it's important for the president to show that he wants to be an actor at that level, and not just putting a little money for the police.
Yes, Susan?
questions which probably aren't related, but I wonder what the official reaction or the public reaction of the Muslim community or communities, because I'm sure it isn't simply monolithic, either has been or you think is likely to be. And secondly, the background of the French citizens, the French nationals who were involved in the actual terrorist acts, because one thing that seemed to come out after 9/11 was that the people who actually did the terrorists were not from deprived backgrounds particularly. They were middle class, were well educated and so on, and at least one of the terrorists that I heard about came from a mixed marriage. His mother was Portuguese, and he seemed to be well integrated according to his neighbors, at least up to a certain point. He didn't fit the profile of people from the banlieue who are just terribly downtrodden, although I'm sure that's also a factor. But I wonder, is there some general pattern emerging about the people who become terrorists in France and what their own background is?
On the first thing, the Muslim community has reacted the Saturday, the day after, saying clearly, this is not in the Quran, this is not our tradition, we will fight that, we disagree with that. So they have been very clear, all the different communities. So there's no ambiguity on that fact. On the other, it's more complicated because if you have some people who can look more or less middle class, nice people, you don't know what's inside there. Some of them have gone to prison several times. Some of them have been condemned without going to prison, but they have been condemned on little things for several years. So their profile, well, if you ask the neighbor what he thinks of those guys, they will never say that they are bad, because those guys, their purpose is to be quiet. I mean, they don't want to be seen as dangerous. So the neighbor will always say, oh, they are nice guys. And they probably were very nice, but you don't know what they did. They were radicalizing somewhere. Their whole center of radicalization in the south of France. There's a guy there who had been in prison several times, and he's free now after the years he had to do, so he's free. And he receives those young people who have some, worry in their conscience, or they say, we would be looking for something where we can do something, destroy this horrible society of consumption and just perversion and so on. So this guy is in the south of France, he received them and he brainwashed them slowly. And they come back home and they are still very nice. So it's difficult to say what's behind the nice face of somebody. They all of them have more or less troubled histories when you look at them. There was an article with their names and what they did. Well, was not too clear, most of them.
Yes.
You said in your ending remarks, you mentioned something about the refugee crisis, but if we look at France before the incident, and we look at regions like Calais in France, do you think that they're honoring this responsibility towards refugees? And is anything going to change now that something so radical has happened?
Now that's the refugee issue in France is very, very difficult. The Calais situation, for those who don't know, it's a city next to the Channel, so they are waiting to get in London or England, because the situation is easier for them in England than on the continent. That place is terrible. This has been terrible for years. Now, at one point, Sarkozy, when he was president, said, we just get everybody out. So he closed everything and he sent everybody away. Okay, but then they came back, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and they made a real camp. Now they are building things for the winter, and it's not a solution. But the problem is also the relation between England and the continent. There's a difficulty there. If we had the same law together, there would be no difficulty. They would get in without problem. But England is always for us the other side of the Channel, and they have particularly special laws for integration, for the help of people and so on, which we don't have. So they play out that difference. And there are a lot of drama in Calais when they try to get in. There's casualties all the time and so on. So it's really, in that sense, very bad. But for the recent coming of these 800,000 refugees, which came from Syria through the different countries, France was a little reluctant, but France took like 60,000 people, and they asked every village to take people, and they have accepted them. So it makes a change. They have to, and in some places it's not that easy because there's no job. So what are they going to do? Maybe in other countries it's easier. Germany needs people because Germany has a demographic problem which is very serious. So Germany needs people, and Germany can integrate people. But in France we have an unemployment around 10%, 11%. So more people coming, it's more difficult for people to find a job.
Can you say something about,
No.
can you say something about COP21? It starts on November 30th. This is the famous meeting on climate change. So there's up to 25,000 visitors expected. It's a long-awaited meeting. And what do you predict will be the climate for climate change?
So the right on the political spectrum have asked to postpone this COP21. Hollande say we will keep the COP21 in Paris at that date. And I think it's reasonable in the sense that this type of big event, you have thousands of police people around. You cannot even take your dog at 2 kilometers because they tell you, what are you doing? And so I don't think there's any security problem more than when they receive many heads of state. They will receive many heads of state. Obama is there and so on. But this sort of hard target are well protected. So the problem of mass terrorism is in the movie theater, in going out of the church, and you cannot put police people everywhere as soon as you have a big group of people. It's a problem of how do you deal with the groups and important groups of people. The COP21 is interesting in that sense. There should be 2 or 3 big manifestations before, like 100,000 people demonstrating in favor or against COP21. Now, will they authorize that? That's not sure, because it's more difficult to control. But the meeting itself, I think there's no problem for that meeting.
Yes.
So we discussed the role of conversation and reflection as important to understand these issues. Now, where does this topic of conversation fit with discussing with the ISIS leaders, the radicalized leaders? More to say that when we start maybe treating this not as a terrorist act, but maybe as a war, and engage in some conversation, some diplomacy with these individuals, is there a solution there? Is there a potential for conversation there?
The problem is that there is no possibility of conversation with ISIS. They do not discuss. They don't ask anything. And there is no way of discussing. While in a normal war, there's always a connection and a capacity of discussion. So in that sense, there is no conversation possible. But I say that conversation because the relation is to public opinion. I think it's very important that the public opinion in every country be able to understand what's going on and not just jump on the first solution saying, oh, this is a war, we just attack and that's it. We will win. No, it's not that simple for several reasons which I mentioned, and one of them is that the whole system of traditional government has been destroyed. So it's important for the people to understand that it's complicated and they cannot just find an easy solution there. And so, like saying all the refugees, we should stop we should stop the refugees from coming. No, that's far too easy. And also we have to consider who are those refugees, where they come from, why they should be received. So all those things, that's the important necessity of conversation with the public opinions of our countries.
Yes?
Do you think the response by Pope Francis and the Vatican is going to shift at all given this new attack?
I think it helps understanding the gravity of the situation. It's very serious. And also, it helps understanding that this is not a religious issue, that if you kill in the name of the God, it's a blasphemy, and it's true. But the religious issue is very far in the mind of those young guys. They have been trained to kill against the West, against the rich, against all that, but not for religion. They could say it's the Muslims against Christians, but in fact it's not what they do, because they kill also Muslims. If they want to kill only Christians, they have to go in places where there's no Muslim. But in this Bataclan there was Muslims, so it doesn't make any sense.
You were mentioning earlier about the integration of the Islamic community in France. And yet over the last decade, there's been a rise of these xenophobic far-right parties in the European Parliament and over the European continent. You have the British National Party in England with Nick Griffin, the Golden Dawn in Greece, Marine Le Pen in France, and they were getting a lot more traction even before these attacks and before the refugee crisis. So I'm curious if there's possibly a problem or a difficulty with European liberalism in integrating and engaging with these Islamic populations.
I think there is in Europe there is a growing tension on the economic situation. The employment is everywhere, less in Germany, but it's very serious in Spain, in Italy, in France, in the north of Europe, and there is people are not satisfied of that. And maybe they feel also threatened by the globalization. Globalization has taken away of our countries all our industry. Not in Germany, which was able to keep their industry, but we lost all our industry in France. So there is a feeling of globalization that's taken things out of us. We are in a situation of insecurity. So when you are in this type of situation, you react and you go to the political parties who are promising security, we will work for you, for the best of you, and for your future, and so on. And so the theme of solidarity, of remaining open to others, this is completely disappearing because of the fear that most Europeans would have of their own situation and their own future. In that sense, we have not taken advantage of the European systems sufficiently, which could have been better. But we just keep those borders at the point that we are making this type of ridiculous things for the police, that we keep separate files from Belgium and France, and we are unable to follow one guy who is going from one place to another. So we have to build something much stronger inside of Europe, probably, for the development of Europe. We cannot do that alone. So I think we see the effect of globalization in the mind of the people after 20 or 30 years of development.
I was just going to press a little bit more on the Islam question, because it's true that there are other factors, but what is providing the motivation for these attacks is a particular reading of a particular religious tradition motivated by or inspired by radicalized religious leaders. So it seems to me that addressing the problem has to include, in some sense, addressing how to provide and to give the Muslim community the resources they need to develop their own internal kind of response to that. It can't be a purely secular response to something that's got a religious wick. And I'm just wondering if you see any possibility of kind of creating a conversation in France that encourages Muslims to not just speak out and say, no, this is not Islam, but show how the tradition can in some specific detail be interpreted so that it doesn't include this, and show the response, not simply, oh, Islam's a religion of peace, but here's how we read these texts, so this is left out.
I think you are very right. The problem is that Islam is so diverse. You have several countries who are very radical Islamists, Saudi Arabia and other countries like that. I've watched television of Wahhabism. It's just incredible. I had someone to translate, but it's just a radicalization and extreme. So anybody can see that. So you have this diversity of Islam, which makes the Muslim response to a Muslim interrogation, which makes that difficult. The response is difficult to have a logical answer to their question, religious questions. Now, there are discussions which are interesting in the interreligious dialogue, when you have a discussion between Muslims, Christians, Jews, and so on. There is a great example, which is the city of Marseille, the south of France. You should go there, it's very nice. Near the Mediterranean Sea. There is a group which has been founded there 20 years ago by the different religious leaders of the city. This is a very difficult city for social problems. There's never been this type of reaction in Marseille, because as soon as you have a social unrest in some places in Marseille, all the religious leaders get together and say, what do we do? To whom we speak? And that's very interesting. Now probably this should be going on at the national level. But it's very difficult at the national level because the Muslims in France are not unified. It took like 20 years to organize a center for the Muslim groups to be together. But it's always falling apart. You have one person who says no, the other says yes. So there is no unity among the Muslims of France. And that makes the dialogue difficult with them. So there is the structure itself of Muslim makes the dialogue difficult. But when the dialogue is on, it really works.
Yes.
Don't you think that the traditional definition of war is not accurate anymore?
Of course, the definition of war is not accurate because we go between this type of conflict to nuclear war, which really does not exist. Is it a war? But there's still some war. There has been wars, some sort of, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, this was a war. It was a civil war, but it was a war. At least you knew who were the enemy. They were clearly identified. And there's, in Syria today, it's a civil war also. So it's true, you don't have any more wars typically between countries, or it's very quick. So maybe we can hope that there's less war in the future than now, than 50 years ago. But it's more wars inside countries, form of conflicts which are different. Low-key conflict and terrorism is one kind of conflict, but it's not a war. So instead of talking about war, we could talk about conflict and try to make more definitions of what kind of conflict we are. That would be certainly helpful. Because the answer to a conflict depends on the kind of conflict where we are. And it's important to be able to describe those conflicts.
The last question.
Okay. So would you think the secularization of Muslims will be a possible choice for France to take in the future?
Secularization.
Say that again, sorry.
Secularization
Yeah.
What about?
of Muslims?
Yes. And the Muslims in France are already secularized as the Christians in the biggest part of them. I mean, they have taken the same type of behavior than the Christians. They are looking for their own well-being, their job, their vacation and so on. You have a good part would be maybe 5% who would go to the mosque. It's just like the Christians, even a little less. So they are completely secularized. And in some way, you don't notice them anymore. So that's why well, I think it's important to discuss about what the Muslims are in France. But this is not the first problem. They are secularized, they really integrate very well, and they have a lot of important position. And they are more and more French. We are already at the third generations, and they are completely French. You just notice that they are Muslim by their name, that's all. But you don't start making differences by the name, because that's becoming racism. So you don't do that. So, in fact, we accept that Muslims are present on the public scene like any other group. And they are taking the whole line of secularization like the others.
So, I just want to say a word about Pierre on behalf of the Jesuit community, because the Jesuits have developed this Gasson professorship to bring Jesuits to this university, and Pierre de Chantonnay will be here for the entire year. Professor Susan Schell, the chair of the political science department, has her in her department. They'll be hosting events. We'll be hosting together between the Jesuit Institute and their office the Gasson Lecture, which will be in late March or early April. We have to get a date on that. The Boise Center is hosting a lunch for him, but there'll be other events, and you can always find him because he's listed here at BC. So I'd like to thank you, Pierre, for your work and for the particular comments you've made here today. Thank you.